The Marshal of Magic. Guns and Magic. By Chris Lowry. Guns and Magic. 1. The Chinook flew in low and heavy over the Khyber Pass, the whirring blades cracking the silent dawn air and revealing to every person in the area their exact location. The belly was filled with 7 men, covered head to toe in black combat fatigues, faces hidden behind baklavas, short-barreled MP5s cradled against their chests. They sat silent, stoic as 2 men manned the giant M60 mini-guns pointed out of the windows. The 7th man sat apart from the rest, and even though he was dressed exactly the same, he was in fact different. The man, this soldier in SEAL combat gear, was in fact a wizard. More than a wizard, he was a combat-trained Magus, CTM embedded with a special operations group comprised of Navy SEALs. His name was Davies McElroy, and he was a trained killer who could do the job with the automatic rifle in his hands or the wand he wore strapped to his combat webbing. Right now, his eyes were closed in concentration as he murmured a cloaking spell for the helicopter as it flew past the barren mountains. The spell casting was draining, and sweat slipped down the bridge of his nose to soak the black fabric that covered his mouth. He could cloak the passage of the chopper, mask it from prying eyes, but he could do nothing for the sound. Davies? Chief? How you holding up? Chief Warrant Officer Gregory Lucas sat closet to Davies on the benches in the helicopter. His gray-blue eyes were hard as flint and glared out at the world. Fine. How far? Chief motioned to the co-pilot, who consulted a radar map. He held up one hand and flashed 5 fingers twice. 10 minutes, Chief told Davies. The wizard nodded and never stopped murmuring. 2. 10 minutes later the helicopter settled quickly onto a bare patch of earth at the edge of a canyon. The Special Operations Group or SOG team quickly jumped out of the helicopter in a standard 2x2 formation. The first 2 men to hit the ground took up positions to set up a crossfire as the others followed and assumed their positions. By the time Davies stumbled out of the side of the whirlybird seconds later, the men had established a perimeter which they held as the chopper lifted off and disappeared into the thin altitude. Davies crawled forward to join the chief. 2 clicks up that hill, he pointed up the vertical mountain path that slid up into the canyon. I'll take point, volunteered Davies. Move out, the chief ordered. 3. Davies took lead about 6 yards ahead of the others. He volunteered for point because that was his job. Even as his eyes scanned the details of the geography, his senses were stretched out. Wizards were real keen on senses, which is how they came to be attached to almost every special forces team in both the American and British armies. Davies had been in the SOG for 3 years, commissioned there after distinguished service with 4 other SEAL teams. It was a lonely existence. The American government discovered wizards at the end of World War II when a ranger detachment discovered a Nazi camp in Germany that trained magic users for combat. Before that, there were no records of wizards being involved in human conflict. Uncle Sam decided if the Nazis could use wizards for war, then so could they. Just as they smuggled out scientists and intellectuals from the country, they stole and gave solace to German wizards in exchange for developing an American force. Anything? Davies extended his sight up into the canyons. He could feel people around them, but no one near enough to notice. Clear, Chief. The chief nodded and Davies kept walking. The rest of the men fell in behind them. Contrary to what the movies in Hollywood would have you believe, a SOG team can spread out almost 50 yards between point and rear. The idea is to keep the men away from each other so that any ambush would limit losses. A SEAL team was cut down that way in a pass not too far from where they were. The men bunched up at a boulder and the terrorists they were hunting attacked and killed them all. That team did not have a wizard embedded. Around that bend, Chief Deves warned. They had traveled the distance very quickly. The chief passed Deves by and moved for the curve in the path. He glanced around the edge, confirmed the area was occupied by friendlies and motioned the rest of the SOG forward. The area was another mountain clearing. This time it was occupied by a group of soldiers and odder still 4 men in suits who looked very out of place in the arid mountains. The soldiers were an Army Special Forces Recovery Unit, a designation given to teams that retrieve the bodies of fallen soldiers from a combat site. They moved around now, preparing body bags for the 7 men who lay in various stages of death. There had been a firefight, that much was obvious. Shell casings littered the bodies and bullet scars gouged the sides of the mountain and rock face. There was no sign of what they were shooting at. The CTM for this team was on point and the furthest body away from the men as they filed into the clearing. Deves noticed right away that the body was scorched by magic. All of the men were touched in some way. No bullets, but plenty of blood. Limbs at odd angles, looks of surprise, shock and agony etched on every face. The CTM was young, his baby-faced cheeks making him look barely out of his teens. Davies stared down at the body. Know him? One of the suits walked up to stand beside him. No sir. Rogers. Your name or his? His. 6 months out. He's too young to be this high up. This was a routine patrol, the suit motioned to the hills. We're in Allied territory. They do this? You tell me. Davies muttered a spell, casting out into the region. Again he could feel more people, a village over the hill, but nothing malicious. No hint of the kind of magic that did this. I got 0, he said. Then you know what this means? Yes sir. He didn't have to say it. Al-Qaeda's got themselves a wizard too, said the suit. Shit, said the chief. It was how they all felt. 3. The bodies were bagged and tagged by the forensics team while Davies cast a seeking spell into the crags and hills surrounding them. He searched for clues, a trace of the magical energies that had been used to wreak havoc on the SEAL team. Anything? Asked the chief. No sir, Davies blew out a soft breath, releasing the magical energy pent up inside his chest. It's like they were never here. There's no life energy, no residual energy, nothing. Weird? Real weird, sir. Chief turned to the others. All right boys, the wizard says he can't feel anything and he put the voodoo on it. That means we're working with some non-regulated shit. Got it? The men nodded. They were pros. What we doing, chief? That was Red Eye, a tall thin man with tiger stripes painted across his face with camo paint. Orders are to move on that village and find the magician doing the voodoo. Wizard. Chief shrugged. Same thing, right? It wasn't a question. He nodded for Davies to take point again and lead them up the rocky path. 4. Davies stopped at the edge of the village and studied the layout below. Some might think he was using his eyes to trace the lines of the sun-baked mud huts, or the tiny plots of donkey offal enhanced soil that sported meager plants. But he was casting his senses to see the hidden. He squinted his eyes against the glare of the sun and wished for a moment he could put on the pair of aviator sunglasses he kept in a pouch on the front of his jacket. While the mirror lenses looked cool, they interfered with his ability to sense magic. He needed true eyesight for this. He was searching for signs of use, hidden signatures that any wizard would leave behind in passing. It wouldn't be much, like a tracker seeing a blade of grass bent in the wrong direction and knowing it indicated someone moved through. So too did magic leave a trace. Especially the kind of magic used to take out an entire squad. The Pakistani wizard would be exhausted, he knew that much. Davies motioned the chief to join him. I can't see him down there. With your eyes? The chief double-checked. Those either. Maybe our tracker can look for a boot print or something. They might be carrying him. He like to get treated like a royal princess too? Am I a burden to your command, chief? The chief hung his head for a moment and chewed on his ample lip. Sorry, he offered. Still not used to you guys on the teams. Here by DoD order, Davies squinted. It's a new world, chief. Sometimes I miss the old one. He opened his mouth and a bubble of blood burst from his lips as he fell forward across Davy. The magic user barely had time to shout before the rest of his squad flopped to the ground in grotesque spasms that left them twisted and twitching in the dirt. Davy shoved the dead weight of the chief off of him and prepared his death curse even as he scrambled to his knees, ready to fire a spell back. The area around him fogged up in a bubble. He could make out the almost perfect edges where the smoke ended and the acrid desert began. But he couldn't see his foe. He didn't see the spell that crashed into the base of his skull where it met the spine. He just blinked into darkness as he pitched forward and rolled down the hill. 5. You're being drafted. The hell I am. That's what I wanted to say. It's what I almost said. But when you're standing in front of the judge, who may be the most powerful magic user on the planet, maybe even the whole galaxy, it's always good advice to keep your mouth shut. Sir? I tried not to squeak it. I mostly succeeded. Did you blow yourself up in the lab? No, I said. I thought I knew where this was going though. The judge did not like to repeat himself. I don't like to repeat myself. I know. Yes, sir. I can hear you, you know. Gulp. It's not so much I forgot that my boss was probably a mind reader. It was a craft beer-induced state of fogginess. Also, he had dragged me out of bed with a summons in the middle of the night. Technically, it was morning, because of the whole after midnight turns into tomorrow deal. Personally, I always wondered about the way we kept time, but I had other things to research. I put a pin in it. Maybe one day I'd ask the judge about the whole calling early morning the middle of the night debate. Or save it for my watcher, Elvis Rodriguez. He liked to research, and obscure information like that was right up his alley. You ready to join me, son? He didn't ask with any affection. I wasn't his son. I was one of his marshals, one of a rotating roster of 12 scattered across the 7 continents. He might have liked me a little bit more than the rest, but only because I had been with him the longest. Alive the longest. A Marshal of Magic does not have a long lifespan. Not normally. My magical gift is a precog, combined with some training as a battle mage and a whole lot of luck. I outlived the others. Anytime he brought on someone new, he tossed them in the eastern USA for me to train. Sometimes it was bueno. Muy bueno. I got to help prepare a new marshal on a million ways to not die in our line of work. Which was keeping magic users in line and taking care of those who got out of it. Usually in a spell first, get info later kind of manner. Except now my boss was telling me I was drafted. Excuse me? I said, get your hump in gear. We've got a situation over in Afghanistan. Yes, sir, I agreed. We've got a war going on in Afghanistan. At least I think we did. Don't blame me for not keeping up with current events. They're way more important to the normals than they are to us. Me. I was born in the early 1900s, so I've watched a lot of changes. I hazarded a guess that the judge was born sometime before Merlin. Hell, he might have been Merlin, except that he looked like that colonel in the TV show about army doctors in Korea. Small round spectacles that gave his eyes a liquid, amplified look. He didn't need them. Balding pate that almost gleamed in a perpetual glow. Did you know magic can't cure baldness? If that's not ironic, I can't define it. Bright blue eyes with hourglass-shaped irises. Eyes that drilled through you and laid bare your soul. Eyes that were staring at me right now, waiting for an answer. Or movement. That's what he wanted. The judge wanted me to move my hump over to the other side of the world. Why isn't the marshal handling it? I referred to the 2 marshals on the Asian continents. One was Russian. One was Chinese. 2 marshals per continent, except for Antarctica. Nothing there to marshal. Because, he said in a really slow voice. I want you to handle it. Yikes. There's no other way to answer except to agree. I wasn't sure if he expected a salute, but I gave him one anyway. It made him smile. Keep that in mind, he flicked a finger in my direction. I felt a whoosh and I was standing outside in Fob in the middle of the Afghan desert. 6. The 4 Marines guarding the gate of the Fob had standing orders to fire first, ask questions later. That or they were so spooked when a man popped out of thin air in front of their guard shack that they lost control of their trigger fingers, sprayed and prayed. I had been with some Marines in World War II on an assignment and figured they were as well or better trained now than they were then. My precog kicked in half a second before the first bullet flew, so I threw up a shield between us and caught almost all the bullets. They deflected out into the sandy wash with dull thuds. They emptied their magazines and stopped shooting as they ran out of bullets. It had to look freaky from where they were standing. Something out of a superhero movie. Here's some guy, strutting up to the front gate like he owned the place, hand lifted just off the waist and their bullets pinging, zipping and chewing dirt everywhere except where they aimed. If I was them, I'd have to question my masculinity, my ability to fight, hell, my reason to existence. I guess they realized I was a magic user before they reloaded and started shooting again, because they didn't waste any more ammunition. They did fan out and surround me while reinforcements from the base joined them. Most folks get a little squirrely at the center of a ring of machine guns aimed at their face. I am not the exception to that rule. Well trained or not, I didn't want anyone to get hurt, most of all me. So I lifted up both hands in the universal sign of surrender. They weren't fooled. Wizard. One of the gate guards shouted to the others. That meant they were zeroed in on my hands. I saw eyeballs flick up to my fingers and hoped the guys behind me didn't decide to shoot anything off. They didn't need to know that a wizard uses willpower for magic, and the hands, fingers, wand were just for focus and sometimes show. Strong magic users could make it happen with their mind. Battle mages are some of the strongest on the planet. Hey, we have to be. Battle isn't for the weak. Lucky battle mages who have precog usually don't worry about being surrounded by Marines. But the judge had popped me here for a reason. A situation, he had called it. But didn't give me any info. Not even a location other than the part of the globe I happened to be standing in. Somewhere on the Asian continent. I need to speak to the man in charge, I called out. Take me to your leader. 6. Their leader turned out to be a colonel. He did not look like a kind-hearted TV character. He actually looked like a real son of a bitch with frown lines etched on the corners of his mouth and between his eyebrows. I'd heard that look called a permanent scowl before. It looked etched on his granite jaw. I thought if ever there was a man who needed to get drunk and get laid, here he was. Probably not too many opportunities out here though. You want to tell me what you're doing here? He growled. I bet he said everything in a growl. I was hoping you could tell me. Sir. I added the sir because a lifetime ago I was in the military. Or a version of it. We called it the Sheatha War, but most history books referred to it as World War II. I was part of the wizard fighting force allied with the normals against the Nazis. The Nazis were real bastards, tapping into dark wizards and witches, that we called sorcerers to do some really evil shite. I was trained to stop them. It's how I met my wife and her twin sister. I was a lucky wizard. They were just good. Better than good, they were great. Judge level powerful. Or maybe just under, because like I mentioned before, I thought the judge might be Merlin. The colonel growled again. How do you people know so much so fucking fast? He moved to the Spartan metal desk on the edge of a plywood wall and picked up a piece of yellow paper. I just composed the message to send to HQ. He showed it to me, but my luck does not extend to long-distance eyesight. I could see that there were letters on the paper, but couldn't make them out. We lost 2 CTMs today. I figured they would chopper in one of you to investigate. Damn it, Judge. What's a CTM? Combat Team Mage. He screwed up his eyes and looked at me like I was stupid. I screwed mine up back and looked at him like I could vaporize him on the spot and go get a beer after. His eyes unscrewed quick. I thought you would know more. That made me shrug. Pretend I know nothing since I was a battle mage. The hand holding the paper shook a little. I had a small thrill of satisfaction because being a marshal is kind of badass and all, but letting a big tough as nails Marine know you were just a different kind of nail was cool too. Battle mage? Germany. France. Netherlands. He swallowed. It wasn't a gulp. And now? I just let the colonel know I had some military training and history with it. He wanted to know how long it had been. I bet so he could just skip what I knew and fill in the blanks on what I didn't. But I wasn't sure how much he was in the know. I know they phased out the battle mage program after Vietnam. The demon crossover in Vietnam had not been pretty. A lot of normals died in that conflict. Mop up on sorcerers and witches had been a pain. We transitioned out the battle mage program, the colonel explained. But we needed the skill set embedded in our units, especially since the enemy had them. So we created combat team mages. To fight? To keep the fight fair, he said. Think of it like radar jamming. That's what it's supposed to be. They go to battle to keep the enemy magi from using magic on our boys. That made sense to me. We had used similar tactics in the Sheatha War. Got it, I said. What's going on here? If he lost 2 of the combat mages, then some magic user had gone rogue. That might be why the judge sent in a marshal. The squads we lost had magic used against them. I nodded. We had a special operations group embedded with us, working out of this base. We lost both today. The enemy had a wizard. A bad wizard that killed 2 combat mages. That told me a couple of things. First, he or she was powerful. Taking out a couple of newbies wasn't all that impressive. Taking down 2 combat-trained wizards meant they had some mojo to work with. Second, they were pure evil pieces of walking crap. I know what you're thinking. Hey Marshal, you kill people, have killed people and a couple of dozen werewolves, so what gives you the right to hop up on a high horse and act all judgmental? They were bad. All bad. I don't necessarily like that part of the job. but it's something I'm not so bad at. Finding the magical criminals and bringing to the judge so he can do the whole judging part. If he sentences them to death, like the hanging judge of Fort Smith once did, I string them up. Metaphorically speaking, since the judge is the one who does the stringing. With magic. And it's not like hanging at all. It's really just more of a flick of the finger and there is confetti where once a person was. Kinda creepy when you think about it. I prefer the whole bringing them in, but on occasion a marshal will have to use force in the field. Like when that same sorcerer is trying to kill you back. They always try to kill you back. It's in their nature. They're evil, just trying to be bad and lord it out over the normal's nature. This one had killed. I suspected they would not come quietly. I was going to need all the luck I could get. Can I get a lift to the site? I asked the colonel. Can't you just poof there? I sighed. Show me on a map. Sometimes the normals knew too much for their own good. 7. The judge is great about popping me out where I'm needed, usually to the surprise of me and whoever happened to be around when I poofed out of thin air. Show off. I could do it too. Transporting took a little concentration, a lot of willpower and a strong urge not to utter, beam me up. I mean, you could if you wanted, since it was a focal point for the application of will, but come on, let's not play with cliches about transporting matter across distance. Concentration. Willpower. Map. You had to have a map to know where you were going. And you had to try extra hard not to think about the moon. Or Jupiter. Basically any place where there isn't oxygen. Because so far as I'm aware, magic yourself into outer space and you become so much debris floating in orbit, or a statue standing next to the American flag that won't ever decay. Poof. Do you know how hard it is not to think about anything while you're transporting? It's why I preferred the train. Or my beat-up old truck. They may be slow, but they get you there. Still, it's a nice spell to have under your belt when you need it. I concentrated really hard on the map coordinates, the shape of the path, the topography. I added in what I thought about the dead bodies, spirits that may have been trapped in the rocks, and what cordite smells like in battle. Anything I could think of to create a space and shape, sight and feel in my mind. Then I willed myself there. And only there. The battleground was empty. The bodies had been moved away, carted off to some temporary morgue before being tagged, bagged and shipped back to the US. I should have gone to search for traces on the bodies before I popped out here. Too late now, so I added that to a mental to-do list, and shifted focus to the task at hand. I cast out my senses and felt nothing. No magic. No ghosts. Not even the village the colonel had indicated was less than half a mile away. That told me something. People leave signs. Normal people leave traces everywhere they go, and traumatic death leads to a sort of spiritual upheaval. When a body is forced to give up the ghost in a violent manner, that ghost likes to hang around, lost and forlorn. That's how you get hauntings. Ghosts are tied to places, structures. This path should be littered with the spirits, and even though they were stronger at night, I should have been able to feel them. Hear them. But there was nothing. No ghosts. Nada. That made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Ghosts are everywhere if you know how to look. The fact that they were missing was a piece of the puzzle. The village that was just over the ridge was missing signs too. Not like a street sign that kids stole because it matched their name, or a population sign someone scrawled on in an effort to be funny. I couldn't feel the signs of life. No people either. No goats, or sheep or children, or dogs. The last time I felt this way. Shit, I muttered and sent up a shield. A spell bounced off and deflected into the rocks and sent up a geyser of dirt. It was followed by 3 others in quick succession. The sorcerer was good. Fast. The spells were pinpoint tight and designed to kill. My precog had saved me. Lucky. I wiggled the fingers on my left hand and tried to remove the cloaking spell that covered the path. It shimmered to sight as a pale fog attached to the area, and I could see harsh sunlight burning at the edges. I concentrated on the light, let my right hand hold the shield bubble as my left went to work on the cloak. Counter spells had never been my strong suit. My wife was a master at spell casting, but she was also a Nordic princess who, along with her twin sister, might have been a Valkyrie. I asked her all the time, and she laughed me off, until she went missing on a mission and I hadn't seen her since. I missed her every day. Times like this, I missed her more. The three of us made a great team in the Sheathe War. Their precision was a compliment to my luck. And dumb brute strength. I'm a battle mage, remember? Precog can only get you too far, but learning to fight with magic means learning all styles. Like a ninja and a samurai, I had a little magic kung fu baby who could Spartan crap up like nobody's business. I called in a hurricane. I guess in the desert, they would have referred to it as a sandstorm, and the rocks around us looked like they had seen their fair share of wind-torn days. The clouds coalesced over our heads, started swirling and cracking off lightning like an out-of-control disco. The wind twirled around the path, the ridge, strong enough to pick up small boulders and dance them off each other. Rockslides scattered around my shield, bouncing with the spells off the edge to careen down the path. The sand-soaked hurricane did the trick and lifted the cloak. It flooded my senses with everything all at once. Ghosts howled louder than the wind. Panicked animals bleated, barked, and howled as the villagers fled from their homes to seek shelter in a giant cave carved from the ridge wall. And then I saw her. A witch standing in the cavern opening. She thrust out both hands and muttered an incantation. 2 arcs of electricity connected in my storm cloud, forming glistening eyeballs that glared down at me. The witch moved her hands and shifted the hurricane back in my direction, and now it was glaring at me, something becoming alive. "Did you just possess that with a djinn?" I screamed. It sounded like she said ha, ha, back, but that was impossible. She was a wizened old crone, Pakistani by her features, and ha ha was way too Americanized of a taunt. But it was a taunt. I was sure of that. That old witch was playing with fire. Literally, because the ancient spurt-possessed hurricane sandstorm began spitting fireballs down on me. All I could think of was a Johnny Cash song about burning rings as I sent up a couple of spells to stop them. Until one blasted the rock and sand beside me into glass and sent me sprawling. I slid backwards on my ass down the hill in a scree of rock, until my butt butted up against a boulder. Ouch! I heard the witch cackle again. "I hate witches," I muttered and crawled to my knees. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate all witches. In fact, Wiccans were pretty awesome hippies in my book. All natural, environmentalists, peace, love and understanding types. It was the crazy witches I didn't like. The ones that got power hungry and turned into sorcerers. They liked to double bubble to boil up some trouble, and it pissed me off. I crawled to the edge of the ridge and peeked over. The crone was making motions with her fingers and the villagers were moving at her direction. Slaves or thralls? I couldn't tell from here. But I could see the spirits trapped in circles around the cavern. She was whipping up a nasty spell, and if she was strong enough to call up a djinn, then using spirits to summon meant she was going after bigger fish. Not literal fish, because we were in the desert. But big, large demon-sized fish. Or whale-sized demons. Witches had released demons in the jungles of Vietnam. The news reported that napalm was used to sever supply lines and suppress the enemy. That was only partially right. It wasn't napalm, it was the judge and a few other battle mages, and they were using fire to destroy a demon incursion and infestation. The same thing happened at the end of the Sheathe War in Japan. Twice. You don't mess with demons. And on witches ever seem to learn. The thing was, she was powerful, and like most strong people, she probably figured she could handle it. But if she turned a demon loose, it would destroy the village, take out all the fobs and invite its buddies to human eating contest. Not on my watch. This wasn't my beat, so I spent all of 3 seconds trying to decide if I should call in backup. But the crone below was making a motion, the trapped ghosts were whirling like miniature tornadoes in their circles, and the villagers lifted up a little girl and carried her to an altar. Because big witch spells called for human sacrifice. I had a problem with that. The witch ran her wart-covered hands over the struggling little girl as the villagers stretched her out over something carved in the rock. I couldn't make out the shapes or symbols from here, but it had to be a summoning glyph. As soon as blood hit it, all hell would break loose. No, I mean literally, a door to hell would open, let in a demon or 3 and everyone except the witch would die. And the ghosts, since they were already dead, but I suspected her spell would zap them to nothing. I felt like a sniper as I lined up my finger, summoned my will and sent a shot at the gathering below. The spell missed the witch and hit the rock. She screeched and shot a spell back at me. I was okay with missing because I aimed at the glyph and took a chunk of rock out of it, rendering it useless. At least she couldn't summon a demon. "Get him!" she screamed. Or close to it. I don't speak Pushu, so for all I know, She was ordering Chinese food. But the villagers dropped the little girl, picked up AK-47 assault rifles and peppered my position with a hail of soft points. The wind picked up and the jinn was stalking my way too. I kept my shield up as bullets chewed up the earth around me. Sand scoured the ground in front of and beside where I stood, but nothing touched me. I watched the witch grin an evil hag grin and point at me. I wasn't worried. She wasn't strong enough to break my spell. Turns out the crone was smarter than I gave her credit for. She scooped the earth out of the ridge in a rumbling landslide of rock and grit. My footing cascaded down the side of the ridge and carried me with it. 8. I didn't pass out. I'm lucky, remember. Small rocks bounced off my head, my ankle smashed between two small boulders and something snapped. But I didn't pass out. I landed at the bottom of the ridge with my head facing the villagers, my feet pointed toward the sky where I had just been. It took 5 seconds for the villagers to start shooting again. I willed my shield in place in 4. It wasn't easy. The fall hurt. My ankle hurt. It was tough to concentrate. I rolled over and tried to focus on the witch. She was on her hands and knees, stone knife carving at the rock glyph, creating a shallow channel in the ruin so blood could still flow through. I hadn't stopped the spell, just delayed it. I pushed up on my knees, and wiggled the fingers on one hand toward the villagers. A couple of the guns stopped firing, the pins jammed, but there were still 24 more. I tried to concentrate on reaching them, but when I let my mind move off the shield, it slipped. I could hear the bee-like buzz of bullets slipping by. Seriously, when this wall all over, I was going to have a long talk with the judge about his idea of assignment. I practiced 2 deep breaths to see if that helped. It pushed back the dizziness a little, but the throb of pain from my ankle was making it hard to think of the next spell. The witch jumped up and crowed in triumph. She dropped the knife and called for the sacrifice. Several villagers broke off from the shooting at me, picked up the struggling little girl and carried her back to the witch as she cast around for the knife she had just discarded. Guess I wasn't the only one distracted. "Hey! Witch!" I shouted. She ignored me. I hated being ignored. I shot a spell at the rocky glyph, but the angle was wrong. A bullet zipped through and smacked me in the right butt cheek. I reeled and fell behind the tiniest little shield I could manage. The villagers who weren't carrying the little girl to her death redoubled their efforts to shoot me in the head. The witch shouted out something in her language. Probably suck on that sucker. Or eat lead, sucker. That's what it sounded like. Then she found the knife, lifted it over her head and started chanting the incantation in a sing-song voice. I could hear the little girl crying underneath it. I dug down deep then. Magic is willpower, and it's belief. If you think you can do magic, you can, and once you learn how to do magic, you know you can, so it makes you stronger. The stronger your willpower, the stronger your magic. It comes in a lot of shapes, flavors, sizes and manifestations, but it's all tied to will. The judge was the strongest magic user on the planet because he had the strongest will. The 12 marshals were a close second. Or close number 2 through 13. I thought about the little girl. The 2 dead magic users. The villager slaves. The Dead Seal teams. There were countless others, I was sure. I thought about the trapped ghosts and the black magic circles that kept them chained, the destruction the demon would wreak. I tapped into it all, let it bubble as rage, ignored the aching burn in my ass and stood up, mostly on one leg and aimed my hand at the crone. "You're going to pay for that," I muttered. The villagers who weren't holding the sacrifice concentrated their bullets on me and their aim was getting better. The witch smiled. The jinn roared. An A-10 Warthog blasted through the swirling clouds and burped a line of gunfire across the villagers. The pilot waggled his wings and skedaddled away from the hurricane. But it bought me a distraction. And no one was shooting at me anymore. I sent a spell into the witch, lifted her up and pinned her against the rock with 2 sharp shards of willpower that lanced through her wrists like nails. She howled in agony and lost her control of the jinn. It swooped down toward the bloody remnants of the villagers. I popped it with a spell, wrapped it in a tight ball and held it grasped in my hand, a spinning buzz of electric energy that sent a tingle up my arm. The jinn screamed almost as loud as the witch. The villagers dropped the girl and stared at each other in horror. They ran away as I limped up the hillside and kneeled next to the girl. "Are you okay?" I smiled. She sobbed and cried and ran away after the people who had just tried to sacrifice her. Guess she was ensorcelled too. The witch writhed and snarled, hurling curses in my direction, but they were worthless while she was pinned. I shifted the will anyway, just to keep her concentrated on the pain. There was a wineskin on pile of supplies, made from goat. I slipped the top and used the wine to erase the circles trapping the ghosts and heard the spirits moan as they returned to haunt the canyons where they died. I wished I could have done more, but magic is only so strong. I tapped that anger for a moment and shoved the gin into the wineskin. Genie in a bottle? I'd save this one for some other purpose. Or hide him somewhere for the next 1,000 years. All that was left then was to memorize the glyph so I could give it to the judge, erase it with a spell, which I did, and then utter the words that would take me home. I'm not in Kansas anymore. Poof. 9. The judge always seemed to know, always seemed to be watching. I truthfully didn't have to say anything. Or I could have said anything. My wife said that was my nervous habit, to quote movies or songs when I was trying to make magic. She did not appreciate me adding in bed to her observations. I popped up in chambers, the witch on the floor beside me, her wrists leaking blood on the stone floor. The judge took one look at her, and confetti. Guess she couldn't be rehabilitated. I described the summoning sigil. Did you find a book? He asked. I shook my head. I didn't check her packs. It would have been out, he scowled. Damn. That's bad business, son. That's going to cause a heap of trouble for you. You mean us? Right. I mean us. He snapped his fingers and I popped over to Memphis. It wasn't quite home, but I had a place here. And I knew a good bar that served craft beer 2 blocks off Beale Street and just a short walk from where he had sent me on the banks of the Mississippi River. Thanks, Judge, I said to the air. He had healed my ankle, and butt too. Judge. Buku power. Way buku. I made my way to the bar with a plan to call Elvis and have him join me. Maybe let him set me up on a blind date he was always talking about. My wife had been missing for almost a decade. Maybe it was time to get back on that horse. The end. Urban Fantasy. Guns and Magic, a Marshal of Magic story. Witch Blues, a Marshal of Magic story. Big Easy Witch, a Marshal of Magic story. Viva Witch Vegas, a Marshal of Magic tale. The Marshal of Magic, Hail Fellow. The Marshal of Magic, The Devil You Know. The Marshal of Magic, Small Medium at Large. The Marshal of Magic, Low Elf-Esteem. The Marshal of Magic, Big Trouble. Crescent City Coven Series. Where the Cats of War. Release the Cats of War. Kitten Murder Mittens.